Hello and welcome to the live stream tonight. I am Chase Oliver, but you already know that. You're here watching the live stream. But thank you for joining me tonight. It is a lovely Thursday evening here, the 25th of June in 2026. Not too far away from the 4th of July. Here we are in the middle of what I call Freedom Summer. It's my favorite time of year. Every year, it starts with Juneteenth. It ends with July 4th. It actually starts a little before Juneteenth with celebrating Loving v. Virginia, but just going right on through to July 4th. So it's my favorite time of year, and I'm glad each and every one of you are here with me today. Hey, yo, says building fins up. I get a little hand wave there from Connor. Make sure you like and you share this stream out so more and more people can see it wherever you're watching this. You can follow me on YouTube, on Facebook, and on X. That's where we're live right here, right now. I got a great guest a little later on in the show. We're going to be talking to a Libertarian candidate for Congress out in Nebraska. Looking forward to that. But before we get there, I just want to cover a little bit of the news, a little bit of the things that have been going on nationally. And so let's get into it. So before we get into what I consider the biggest distraction or the kind of thing that's taking our eye off the ball a little bit, and myself included, I wanted to get into the real serious stuff. There is a war still going on in Iran. We're looking to end the war. I don't really agree with all the terms of what we're giving away to end this war, but we really do need to end this war. And to hopefully hasten that, the War Powers Resolution looked to pass just the other day, which would have kind of forced the president's hand to see what the president would do when Congress officially rebukes this war in Iran and demands that it ends. And unfortunately, some Republicans in the United States Senate decided to change their minds in an effort to appease President Trump and give him the benefit of the doubt, which to me is a little crazy. I'm just going to say that's just my own personal opinion here. So I am always somebody who wants to end these wars. I think we need to end this war in Iran as quickly as possible. But I do think we need to get our legislature on the record to say that starting this war was a really dumb idea. So I'm not very happy with the way things are going in Congress with regards to that. And we're also seeing more dysfunction going on in the United States Congress between them and the president, which is yesterday, whether you agree with this housing bill or not, a bipartisan housing bill was passed. There are things I like in that bill. There are things that I think are, a little heavy-handed. But however you feel about it, the entire Republican House conference was at a press conference ready to tout that they're caring about affordability and they're trying to fight for the little guy going into November. And the president shot that all down because he basically said, I'm not signing this thing until you pass this Save America Act, which is, if you're not familiar, it's a piece of legislation that would put a little federal rules on our elections, which I am not really for centralizing the power of elections. I do believe that our local communities can best handle that stuff. We don't need a giant centralized federal government solution there. And it's not going to pass the United States Senate. It doesn't have the votes. And so it seems like Trump is just really shooting his own party in the foot. But those are the big, official news stories out of DC about things that actually matter. Your tax money being exploited from you, war and peace, that kind of stuff. But let's get into the big distraction of the week, which is the reflecting pool. The big project that Donald Trump touted, that, he said, I got the best guy for this. I know a guy who painted my pools one time. He's going to make the reflecting pool look amazing. And as often happens when you give out a no-bid contract from the government to somebody who you're buddies with, your buddy with, the job does not get done as nearly as efficiently as they were originally told, and as well as it was originally told. Originally they were saying we can do this for $2 million. It jumped up to $14 million, which again, total drop in the bucket when you think about the total federal expenditures and the trillions of dollars of national debt we run. But still, it is our money that we're wasting there. And it went to a reflecting pool project, which, as we see, immediately algae started blooming, paint started peeling up. You see all kinds of excuses from the administration claiming Antifa must have jumped in the pool with a knife or whatever, which, frankly, there's a 24-hour webcam on that pool. If someone did that, that footage would be being released. So let's just call me a skeptic of pool knife gate. I don't believe that that's actually happening. But to appease the president, they have now put up fencing around the pool. They have National Guard guarding the pool. They've put more resources into this than they have into anything close to the Epstein files. Let's be real. So that's just my personal opinion on the whole thing. Is it's a bit of a distraction, but it is hilarious how much it has blown up. Because no one would care about this. Like if this was a $14 million renovation project that was not touted by the president of the Oval Office, complete with like big diagrams of how big the pool is compared to skyscrapers and all that junk, no one would have noticed. Like no one would have cared. I mean, maybe a few people in DC would have noticed, like, hey, there's some algae or the paint's peeling, but it wouldn't be a national story and kind of a national embarrassment, which is why I hate, I'm a libertarian. I fight for libertarian candidates. I want libertarians to succeed. But right now, we have a Republican president named Donald Trump, and I hate to give him advice, but here's the thing, man. Focus on the important stuff. Excuse me. Focus on the things that really matter to the American people, and less press conferences about pools and picnics and musical guests that are canceling on you or UFC fights in the front lawn. All of those things are a distraction from the real job you're supposed to be doing. Whether I agree with you or not, or agree with the voters or not, the voters of this country hired you to do a job, and that was not to renovate the White House. It was not to host fights on the front lawn. It was not to change the reflecting pool. It was to be the head of the executive branch of the government, which is in massive disarray. And someone said the other day, like, hey, success. Doge fired a bunch of federal workers, which, excuse me, I'm all for reducing the federal workforce, but the government's more expensive when we're still running massive deficits. The government's still growing, even if the number of people doing the stuff is less. The amount of things they're doing is growing. And that's a concern. That's a concern, I think, for every libertarian, but really every taxpayer should be really concerned with the size of the debt and deficit, especially if you have kids and grandkids. And so just my little bit of commentary is the pool might be a distraction a little bit, but it is kind of symbolic and indicative of how this administration has run things. They focus on the little things. They don't focus on the big things. And in doing so, they kind of embarrass themselves and also take their eye off the ball of the things that really matter, which end up making the government grow and be less responsive and more abusive. And we've seen tons of abuses. Most recently, we've seen voters being pulled out of voting lines by ICE. That is a new thing. And then the last thing I want to talk about before we get to our guest, because we are about to talk about a libertarian candidate, I want to discuss the recent Washington Post article that came out discussing headline: RFK Jr. urged Iowa candidate to make deal to help GOP win House seat per audio recordings. Now, RFK Jr. Called at least two candidates in the state of Iowa who were running as libertarians. One of them is my good friend Rick Stewart. He's an amazing libertarian. He's one of the hardest working libertarians I've ever met. He ran for governor a few years back and traveled to every county in Iowa and earned enough votes to get Iowa major party status at the time. So he is a hardworking guy, and he was called by RFK, and in so many words, given almost a quid pro quo to drop out, which not only violates a lot of regulations for RFK Jr. to be doing as an elected official, but really spits in the face of his whole independent campaign for president in 2024, where he said he wanted to change the dynamic and tear down the two-party system. And now it seems that he is just as engrossed in that two-party mechanism as any other politician out there. So it's sad to see. I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. And this is why it's important not to support those fly-by-night candidates who will sell out for a seat at the two-party table, but to fight for independent, true independent candidates like libertarians across the country who want to be the adult in the room. They don't want to sell out. They want to fight for their communities. They want to fight for their neighbors. And that's leads me right into our next guest. He is currently fighting to represent the 2nd Congressional District in Nebraska, which makes up Omaha and some of its suburbs. Let me just pull up my intro here. I had it all written down. And of course, me being as disorganized as I can sometimes. But yeah, I want you to meet Eric Michael Foreman. He is a lifelong Nebraskan, a working class family man, and a Libertarian candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. He was raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, but now has his roots in Omaha. And he is a regular working person. He currently serves in property management and maintenance, but he is somebody who has been running for Congress because he believes Nebraska deserves real representation. He thinks Washington, D.C. has become disconnected from the people it serves, and that both major parties have contributed to growing debt, rising costs, and increasing division. So I look forward to bringing him on the show. Everybody give a great warm welcome to Eric Michael Foreman, and we're going to discuss that campaign. Let's bring him on stage right now. Hello, Eric. How you doing tonight?
Thanks, Chase. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Hey, well, we appreciate you. First and foremost, I want to say thank you as a former candidate myself, as somebody who's represented the Libertarian brand, not just in my home state of Georgia, but in Nebraska as well, as a candidate on the ballot in 2024. Thank you for being a candidate. You are, it's not an easy thing. So go ahead and want to say thank you to that. But just tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of encouraged you to run for Congress? What got you to get out and do this thing?
Well, my name's Eric Michael Foreman. I'm 46 years old. I worked in kitchens pretty much the first 20 years of my adult life. That was my passion. Anybody who's worked in that kind of industry knows the money ain't there. There ain't a lot you can save, and healthcare is way too expensive. When I had children, that cost really glared at me. And so I was like, oh, it looks like I had to go find a better paying job. So I dabbled in the trades and jumped around from a few places, and I've really found my niche in property management because I can still serve people. I can still help problems and solve. And plus, you got to use tools. I mean, I like building, I like fixing. So it's just one of those things about my character I love about. So anyway, this job's been a pretty good fit for me so far, but I've done a lot of different things. What motivated me mostly is because when I thought I was finally getting ahead and making headway and getting that future that I always thought was out of reach for me, COVID happened, our inflation happened, and it felt like I got knocked right back to where I was 10 years prior with struggling paycheck to paycheck. And I'm like, this is not right. I still make it. I still live paycheck to paycheck some days. But I just started watching everything go up. Nobody really talking about the real issues. They're always about the theater. And you were mentioning the reflection pool earlier. Again, it's just a distraction. We got so much bigger things going on. Like the SAVE Act, for one, is a great start to it, but it's also an example of the ineptitude of our Congress and the way they stall things out. We get great people in there that just seem to be overwhelmed. And I witnessed this. Before I ran, one of my motivators was Thomas Massey. He was principled, steadfast, right in the face of all the hate. He didn't care. He made great jokes. I mean, I got to admit, he was a funny guy. But I felt like he was so outnumbered. Like he needed backup. He needed somebody else in there with the same kind of mindset and the same goal for all of America. And a lot of compounding things got me to run. It was speaking to one of my friends who kind of convinced me to do it. Initially, I just wanted to run for something local. Started talking to him. We were hashing back and forth about ideas, and he said, "Go big or go home." And that's kind of my personality anyway. And so I said, "Okay, I'll go for U.S. Congress." I was dissatisfied tremendously with Don Bacon, and I felt, what better way to show our constituencies that there is someone that actually hears them, not somebody who just phones in their town halls.
Well, I feel a lot of similarities there with you. First and foremost, I spent a lot of my first 20 years of working life in kitchens too, being everything from a dishwasher to a line cook to a server and manager. So I worked in restaurants a lot. I was in and out of kitchens a lot. So I know the hard work, and you're right, the lack of pay sometimes that job provides, but it gives you a work ethic, man. I will tell you that. Anybody who's ever worked in kitchens for a while, I trust them to learn and do about any job that you put them up to, right? Makes for great work ethic for a candidate, for sure. And affordability is something that I think, as you mentioned, the distraction, the reflecting pool, affordability is the thing that matters most to most Americans, making those ends meet. And you're right about the power of the inflation and what happened during COVID when we just spent like it was going out of style. And
Still are.
so I feel a lot of that similarity there. And then as far as, we've seen what happened to Thomas Massey, Donald Trump's Republican Party does not feel welcome to people who support those libertarian ideas. And so we have to have an alternative. We really have to put, like I said, an adult in the room, and I think you challenging Don Bacon is fantastic. And I think this is a race where we have a real impact as
I
a
totally
Libertarian
agree.
Party and really have a potential to win this thing. And so I encourage folks, let me go ahead and gotta do the business of the business here. Go to ForemanTakeBackOurHouse.com. ForemanTakeBackOurHouse.com. That is a website where you can go. You can learn more about Eric, more about his campaign, and of course, donate to his campaign. I encourage libertarians to donate to libertarians. I encourage non-libertarians to donate to libertarians. If you got money, give it to our candidates because we need to have alternatives on the ballot. And I encourage that for anybody who maybe just sick and tired of seeing the same two choices all the time. Like Gary Johnson used to say, if you don't like freedom from tyranny and abuse of government, you can always vote it back in 2 years from now. So I encourage you to get out there and support Eric and all our libertarian candidates. You mentioned Thomas Massey. Shout out to Jeremy Todd out there in Kentucky, who is fighting to get that seat back from the big state and is running as a libertarian. Really going to miss Massey. Me too. But you know what? This is why we have a potential to elect folks like Eric. So get out there and support his campaign. But you mentioned to me, when we were communicating before this interview a little while back and forth, and of course your campaign manager is awesome guy. Shout out to you as well.
Thank you,
His
Oliver.
first name is my last name, so we Olivers like each other. But we discussed the uniqueness of this district and why it might be important for us to really put a spotlight on here. So I'll leave you to explain that a little bit about why we think Nebraska too is really one worth fighting for.
Well, our area is really unique. Me growing up here, Husker football is in our blood. You can't get away from it in this state. So when you grow up with that kind of unity and that thing that can really bring us all together, hundreds of thousands of people in Lincoln, Nebraska, I mean, all for one purpose, to support our team. That kind of unity is not what I'm seeing that's representing in our politics here. We split our electoral vote when, in my heart, it feels wrong. Like we should be united as one state, giving our vote to the federal elections. We shouldn't be splitting. We shouldn't be putting little signs in our yards, separating ourselves from our neighbors. We should be unifying on our differences of opinions and trying to find a good compromise. I believe the Libertarian Party is the best bridge for that. It's why I joined the Libertarian Party. I think that's the way to bring us, but it's also the recognition. It's getting people to understand that there is this third viable option, and we share a lot of the same values from both sides. I don't get a lot of bad feedback when I introduce myself. I know online it seems to be a whole different world with us bickering back and forth, but most who are not part of the Libertarian Circle, they have a very vague view of what we do or what we stand for. And anytime you explain it, they're just like, yeah, I love that. Why can't we be like that now? Aren't we supposed to be that way now? So I believe we have a really good chance here. I want to keep this state in conservative valued hands. And that's my overall main goal. The other aspect of running for this, see it and the importance of it, is what we can show the country. If Nebraska can lead this way and say, hey, we have had enough of both the Big Tent circuses. We want some real representation. Other states should soon follow. I'm a big proponent of finding someone to run in every single race out there just to put the name on the ballot, even if you just want to be a paper ballot. You get different opinions of why people don't want to run, but the ones that would think about it are the ones that don't want to dive into the political bureaucrats and the money laundering and all the other snaking. They want to remain pure, which I love that. I love that. But I'm like a mongoose, man. You send me into one of these snakes, I'll start snapping heads off. Like I grew up pretty rough, and I grew up around a lot of crooked like people. I kind of always see their game, and it's pretty weak to me. I mean, I think we need to have true representation that has the base fundamental of America and overall freedom and less government as the foundation going into Congress. It can't be trying to make laws or impose laws or help other people. I think the ambition has to be to uphold our Constitution and represent the people that we live in, not the lobbyist area. I mean, there's so many facets that I can get on tangents with. I'll try not to, that we can change just by being based and being small-minded representative of our community.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree, and with a lot of what you're saying there, and like really, I liken it to what we've had for the longest time is we've had two parties that really take advantage of their voters. They kind of take voters for granted, which is why so many people don't even vote. We have like 4 in 10 Americans don't vote in most of our elections. 60% is considered like a good number. And for me, that's because a lot of people live in apathy because they feel like, hey, I don't really feel well represented by a Republican or by a Democrat. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that these candidates or these members of Congress, like Don Bacon, they spend so much of their time in DC that they're really losing touch with their constituency. And this is one of the reasons why I support term limits, is because I feel like, after a certain amount of time, you're in Washington more than you're at home. You become more of a Washingtonian than you do a Nebraskan. And that's not really great for your for your folks back home, because your priorities start changing. And so this is another reason
And those
why
in
I'm a
your ears
libertarian.
as well.
Huh?
You'll have DC mouthpieces in your ear more than your constituents.
Exactly.
You're
And
exactly
it'll
right.
be about what you can do to stay in power. And this is what we're starting to see. And also you start reacting a lot out of fear, fear of a primary challenge, fear of losing your fundraising, that kind of stuff. And so, for me, I think we need more honest brokers in DC. And, Nebraska, being part of, kind of out west, certainly out west from me here in Georgia. But it has its own kind of community values. It has its own kind of that area of the country. I've traveled all 50 states doing the whole running for president thing. And what I found in that area of the country is a lot of what I consider quiet dignity. People who aren't trying to get in everybody's business. They know their neighbors, but they don't like try to pry into their neighbors. They're a community, but they're also not snooping in on each other. They don't like that kind of behavior, and they certainly don't like it from our government. And so I think one of the things that makes this district in this area of the country really ripe for libertarian votes is that kind of streak of independence that people have. That they'll help they'll help their neighbor out. They'll find the solutions in their community to help their community, but they don't want to be prying, whether it's into their neighbor's business or into their private lives. It's a very live and let live part of the country. And I think that would serve libertarians really well to really invest here. So I just want to bring up just a few things about, just a couple questions about how we're feeling. Obviously, you mentioned the size of government, how much we're spending, and wanting to be a conservative voice. I assume fiscally conservative, wanting to, not only cut taxes, right, but make sure that any tax money that does gets used wisely and isn't just wasted on stuff.
And legally, yeah. I think what I hear last week, they were talking about half of our deficit could be up to fraud. Like that literally could be the cause of why we're so out of whack, which makes sense if you can't balance a budget and you're just letting your friends steal everything. Everything's going to go whack. But yeah, fiscal responsibility is definitely a main point. But with the Epstein list, the violence, kids in general are a main component of why I also want to run. Seeing the things that we've seen and heard and still not really feeling the accountability is happening, the justice is working. The whole trust the plan is getting an old rendition to run for 10 years now. I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I started looking about how do we hold these people accountable? If we don't have a Department of Justice willing to prosecute, charge, drag them in handcuffs, I mean, we see our normal citizens get hauled away in cuffs for way less than what these guys are stipulating with evidence backing. So I started looking at ways we could really enforce this. And I thought about how do we empower our county sheriffs, the ones that are elected to uphold the law, that are accountable to the people. How do we empower them with the moral authority and the discrepancy to hold these constitutional violations accountable? Like we used to force integration back when we ended segregation. Like why is our government not backing the people and the rights of everybody against corporations and bakeries to bake cakes and things? I'm just really confused on how we go back to that kind of America where our government protected our rights, not tried every instance to infringe on them.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of what you're discussing here is, especially with the Epstein class, is really this kind of new recognition. And by the way, I don't know if I cut out for a minute there or you did, but feel free, folks, in the comments. If anything cut out, let me know. But I got 90% of what you were saying there. And what I will say with regards to the entire Epstein list exposure, the fact that we were told by this administration that that was going to be a priority, it garnered a lot of people to vote for them, I would imagine. And then suddenly that became something they don't want to talk about. We're now seeing even a book coming out from New York Times reporters who have sources saying that this cover up of Epstein files was discussed in the Situation Room, which is supposed to be like the most secure national security area of the White House. So why are these discussions happening there? And really what it does is it really brings about, in stark contrast, the average working Joe, how separated the elites in this world are from the average person. Because the average person wants to see justice. The elites are fine ignoring it. The average person, if they were accused of doing what is shown in the Epstein files, would be arrested. But the elites get away with it. They find that the elites are able to lobby for tax revenues and shelters, giveaways and subsidies, which makes ultimately the average Joe who doesn't have an army of lobbyists and lawyers to fight on their behalf, their life becomes more expensive because more of their wealth has to be extracted because less of theirs is, because they know how to rig the tax code for themselves. And so one of the things that I hear from your message is that you want to be a voice for the average person and not for this really wealthy class of people who really control the Republican and Democratic Party. You could even these working class candidates. I'm looking at you, John Fetterman and Graham Plattner, folks like that, who claim to be working class. You're part of a multi-billion-dollar apparatus that is the Republican or Democratic Party. And it just really becomes hard to be that honest broker for the average working man, which again, is why I encourage people to support Eric Foreman for Congress. And I'm going to throw that banner up there one more time.
Thank you. ForemanTakeBackOurHouse.com.
ForemanTakeBackOurHouse.com. Go
there. We're going to kick out the squatter lobbyists. We're going to start making our respective representatives listen to us and be at home more than they're in DC. That's one of my main goals, because I don't like being away from my family. I don't know how you feel about your family and friends, but I don't like thinking I'm that far away from my kids and my family and my community, thinking I'm doing work up there. So, again, you're right. They spend too much time up there. I really want other people to recognize our duty to run for an office. I want them to be able to know that it's not as hard as you think it is. You don't need to have some fancy Ivy League degree. You just have to have a will to help your family, help your friends, and get involved. It's super easy locally.
Well, one of the things I'm going to encourage you to do is make sure you get out there and knock on those doors. Now, again, I feel a little simpatico with your campaign, because my first campaign also was for the United States House, way back in 2020. Feels like a lifetime ago. But one of the things I encourage you to do is get out there and knock on those doors, meet your community so they can hear this message. That is one of the biggest things that libertarians make the mistake of doing. They think they can do all of their campaigning online. Hey, it's great to be on live streams. It's great to do podcasts. It's great to, have an email list and everything, but nothing will beat that good old fashioned elbow grease of meeting your neighbors. And so that's always the piece of advice I give everybody, whoever runs for anything.
One of the funnest things I love about
what's your biggest advice? Get out there and meet the voters. Find where the voters are. Be polite. Encourage house parties in your district, wherever you're running. Encourage people to, if you have friends, tell them to invite their neighbors to barbecue and give
Yeah.
you 10 minutes to
We got
speak.
some of
You
those
go out
things
there and
kind
give
of
your
planned
spiel.
out.
Yeah, and then that will help you. You getting into their homes will help you take back the house, right? And so, while we have a little more time here, I want to just ask you a couple of things. You mentioned family earlier. Let's get into a little more about Eric, the person. So you mentioned you got a family. I assume that means a spouse or some kids. So go ahead
Yeah.
and plug how amazing they are and how lucky you are to be with
Oh,
them.
super blessed. Now, when I was growing up in my upbringing, I never thought I'd have, the picket fence in the house and 2 kids. I thought I was going to be the lovable uncle my whole life. But I met a great woman, changed my life. Honestly, I can't think of any other way my life would have turned out without her. 2 beautiful children. They're not rebellious. They're actually really good kids. And so I'm a little shocked. I thought one of them would be like me, and really give me a hard time. But my kids are wonderful. I'm very blessed, thankful. Uh, I'm a big proponent of keeping peace in the house. And if there's no peace, it's usually me yelling so that it keeps a nice somber tone in the house. Uh, my family's everything to me. I try to do what I can for them. But this newer generation, with the technology and the not going outside very often. I mean, I'm already a pasty person, and to see my daughter never get real much sunlight is kind of disconcerting. So they're
Yeah,
always in
well,
their room on their devices, or I mean, they do breed too. I guess I can't knock them for too much, but
that's
just not getting
that's the
outside.
kids today, man. I mean, honestly, if you spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the new Toy Story film, it's all about how kids don't play with the toys; they're on the devices these days.
I didn't even
Very
know there was a new movie. My daughter just mentioned it. I think we were going to go see it this weekend, to be
Hey,
honest.
I won't say anything else other than the fact that it's really good, and daughters will love it. It is great because it is a movie where, let's just say, one of the girl toys really gets a lot of the center stage, and so I won't spoil any more of it, but it's a
All
great
right.
film and perfect for those. You mentioned the kids and the devices. After the movie, you can say, "Hey, remember that movie?"
I can see.
But I did also want to mention, you mentioned in your website and getting to know you that you're also a follower of Christ. I'm somebody who is as a weekly church goer, as somebody who's always worn my faith on my sleeve and used that to kind of guide, as an anti-war guy, as somebody who's pro-compassion for people, especially against the abuses of government. A lot of that is guided by my faith. So if you don't mind, if you want to take a few minutes to kind of discuss how that influences you or how that has worked its way into your life, I'm sure folks out there watching might
Well,
enjoy hearing a little bit about that.
well, my faith is pretty much based around always feeling alone growing up, isolated, hard times really made you kind of grasp at whatever semblance you had of morality, even being around the unmoral and the immoral. Um, at times, I may have abandoned him, but I don't think he's ever abandoned me. And when I finally realized he's always been with me, and all I had to do was turn around and ask him, that it was a powerful day for me. I don't want to really get into it; it's very deeply personal, but it was a clarifying issue, like a ghost handed me a tissue kind of thing. I sobbing in my own hands. Someone touched my hand and gave me a tissue, very kind in my mind of, wipe the tears away. And as I looked up to see who gave it to me, there's no one around, no one. And my heart just exploded. Like I was just in, I don't know, white shock. Um, and just going through what I was going through at that time, I realized this is where I need to always keep my mind at, keep my focus at. And I'm not always perfect about uh, being the best man I can be, but I'm always trying.
Yeah.
My wife is a big supporter in my journey and my kids, and in my household alone, I have Christ that's filled this house, and it's my castle. I don't like even leaving this house. I feel safe and warm here, like I never had a home before, kind of thing. Like this is where I am, and so, because I'm not a practicing Catholic like my wife and my children are, I consider myself a Christian. Um, I find listening to other versions, like I really like the Baptist church and I like live bands. The Catholic Church, I don't know if you're familiar with Catholics, so they're very boring and dry to me. And I didn't feel the love and celebration as I do in somewhere. You can feel the energy in the room. You can feel God's love in the room. And I just love places like that. So we alternate between two different churches. They got a live band. They got
Hey, man.
live instruments, and I love those.
Well, one of the things I was blessed with when I was traveling across the country as a candidate is, a lot of Sundays, I was not, at my normal church home. And so a lot of times supporters or volunteers, they would invite me to their churches. And so I got to like really experience the full spectrum of Christianity and also Islam and Judaism. Like I got to experience a lot of religious traditions during my travels, and it was really cool to see. And I grew up in the evangelical tradition myself. A lot of live music, a lot of a lot of the churches of my youth not only had music but had flag displays at the and full on dance numbers. It was a whole thing. And me now, I'm an Episcopalian, which is kind of like the joke is we're Catholic without the Pope because we retain a lot of the same traditions. And I guess I'm a more mellow guy, but that's what's spoken to me. But the great thing about God's message is that it comes in a lot of different languages, and you find what speaks to you. And I'll say as somebody, a person of faith, that it just really guides a lot of what I do. I don't necessarily wear my faith on my sleeve. I certainly am not one who wears, say, a minister's collar or anything to that effect. But I'll happy to discuss it with anybody. But I also think just deep down, kind of the values that I face as I go forward in political activism, running for office, generally being somebody who believes in liberty. A lot of that to me comes from that faith background. So always nice to have a fellow brother in Christ, along for the ride. And again, we want to support your campaign, whether you're Christian, atheist, what have you, wherever you fall on the spectrum. The great thing is Eric Michael Foreman is going to fight for you, Nebraska. So if you are out there in Nebraska too, or you just want to make a difference in Nebraska too, get out there and support Eric by going to foremantakebackourhouse.com. That's foremantakebackourhouse.com. Get out there and support Eric and fight for having a libertarian choice on the ballot to rival Don Bacon. And I think this is a great opportunity to really show the Libertarian Party what we're made of. And so, folks, I encourage you to get out. A few comments here that we got as we were going through. Pressing matters for libertarians running for Congress. Kill FISA, stop the merger or military with Israel's in the draft registration. Kill the kill switch. Titles of nobility amendment. Shout out to a Michael Bagnart constitutional seminar. Good stuff there all around. Outreach doesn't even need to require someone to be a candidate. Anyone can tell anyone else about libertarian ideals. I talk about libertarianism with nearly everyone around me. Just do that with consent. Don't unconsentedly talk to somebody about libertarianism. But yes, good on you, Connor. Thank you for doing that. Jason says, Toy Story 5 was pretty solid. Been a while since I saw the fourth, but I don't recall the fourth one being all that. I'm going to agree with that informal movie review right there. We look forward to Eric getting out there with his family to see that film. But in the meantime, we want to say thank you very much for coming to discuss your campaign. Eric, thank you so much for running as a candidate. And hopefully this won't be the last of you that we hear of on the live stream here, but we'll check back in as it gets a little closer to election day and see how things are going. I'm planning to do an election day as early voting kind of gets underway across the country. I'm going to try to do a candidate telethon shout out. So I'd love if you could be a part of that, along with as many other candidates across the country as I can get on this. But thank you so much for being a candidate. So, and Cody says, good luck, Eric. I concur.
Thank you, Cody. Appreciate you very much.
And so we're going to take a couple of minutes. I'm going to take about 60 seconds to get myself a glass of water. We're going to throw ourselves off stage for just a second, you guys, but we'll be right back because in the next little segment, we're going to discuss what it means for Stonewall and what that is. And so we will be right back. I'm just going to remove us from the stage. Be back in about 60 seconds. Don't go nowhere. All right. I'm back. See, I wasn't even gone for a minute, you guys. You guys thought I was going to be gone longer than that. Well, I am back here. I am still joined by candidate for Nebraska House 2, Eric Foreman. He is still here chit-chatting with me. And I mentioned a little bit at the top of this show and in the description. I wanted to discuss this weekend. So, full disclosure, I thought in my brain, I don't know why, I thought I was interviewing Eric last week, but I mixed up in my brain. And so we're doing this show, but I also had a live stream planned for this week as well that I wanted to talk about that's kind of particular to this time of the month. So I couldn't really shuffle them both around. So we're kind of doing a mismatch here. So thank you for bearing with me here, Eric. But I wanted to discuss Stonewall, which, if folks who are watching are not familiar, this weekend is Stonewall weekend coming up. And if you're not familiar with what Stonewall is, that's why we're here. I'm happy to explain it to you. So Stonewall is really a moment in history in 1969 that really started the modern LGBTQ rights movement. And I want to discuss like what that moment was, why I feel like it was libertarian in nature, and then what it means, what I believe as a libertarian is what we can do to fight for equality, not just for LGBTQ people, but for all people, but certainly kind of highlighting where there are areas of liberty where it's being denied to some folks, and why we need to have equality under the law in this country, why that makes sense, even if you're not LGBTQ. So that being said, Eric, I mentioned real briefly what Stonewall was to you in our pre-interview, but you were not familiar with the term, correct?
Not in that terms, no. I could totally, as soon as you started seeing it, before you even mentioned the whole libertarian angle, and I kind of already recognized it. They were already doing what they were wanting to do. The government had made laws. Like I didn't even have any clue that they had actual those laws on the books were restricted. The three garment law, like that seems like I was always under the impression there was a lot less laws back in the day.
Oh
But
yeah.
that seems a little wild to me.
Oh yeah. So to kind of back up and discuss what we're talking about. So Stonewall itself, this was in June of 1969, way back when, and this is at a time when being gay or lesbian, non-conforming, gender non-conforming, that kind of folks, it was a little bit of a different time back then. It was not like today. There was not mass representation in media. There was not, it was not somewhere where like everybody knew, it was a much more clandestine kind of community. And in New York City and big cities, that was where most people could move, right? If you lived in a rural community, right, you might move to LA or to New York or Chicago or Atlanta, right, depending on where you are in the country.
You're
And
leaving
that's
out San Francisco.
yeah, San Francisco, forgot. Yeah, almost forgot that. But wherever, and that's where you would move to feel like you could have community, be a little bit more yourself. And in these cities, there were bars, meeting places, like the Stonewall Inn, which was in New York City. I've actually been there, really cool. And in 1969, these bars in New York City a lot of them were owned by not the nicest people. Many times it was the mafia that owned these bars, because organized crime was like, hey, we'll serve watered down drinks to whoever, and who are the gays going to complain to, right? Like we're giving them something that no one else gives them, right? A place to be. And so they would create these bars, run these bars, and a lot of times to avoid the police coming in and raiding your bar, you would pay kickbacks to these police. And the police, as you mentioned, they had a rule like if you're wearing garments that are 3 garments or more that are of a gender that's not your assigned gender, you could be arrested for indecency or obscenity, or for dancing with the same-sex partner. This could be considered obscene. And so these bar owners, they would pay these kickbacks, right? Because that's what criminals do. When you create a criminal enterprise, they have to bribe somebody to get away with it. So they bribe the government, ultimately. And the owner of the Stonewall Inn stopped paying his kickbacks. And what happens when the government stops getting their bribes? They want to put the screws to you. And so they decided to raid this bar and start arresting people. And what happened in a response is the patrons of the bar were not having it. And they fought back. And they actually, at first, there were only a few police officers there, and they kind of scared them into the bar. Like they started barricading themselves in the bar. And then as backup arrived and more people around the village came out and saw what was going on, they pushed back against police for 3 days of an uprising. And imagine, if you will, right? Lines of police up against lines of bar patrons who are doing kick lines like the Rockettes, right? That's what was literally happening. And what it was is it was an expression of a community who was like, hey, man, we're not going to be shoved any further into the shadows than you've already shoved us. We're not going to let the government rob us of our final dignity and arrest us for being who we are. And that to me is very libertarian. And I think, more people need to learn about the story of what Stonewall represents, because right now, when you see pride parades and pride festivals, a lot of it is corporatized. A lot of it is like very like, it's not really telling that story anymore so much as like, hey, we want gay people to shop at Home Depot, and we want gay people to buy tickets on Delta Airlines, or drink Coca-Cola or eat at McDonald's. It's been very corporatized, and the rebel spirit that really started that whole movement kind of is missing a lot of the time. So a lot of people maybe don't hear that story. And as a libertarian, I feel like it's important that we recognize that our party itself was formed not long after that, in 1971. And the mood of the country in the late 60s and early 70s was a very anti-authority time. It was a time of the Vietnam War. It was a time of great social upheaval. It was a time when people did not trust authority. And it's when people viewed the government as utterly corrupt. And that's what helped found the Libertarian Party. And so I find a lot of same connective threads. To me, I think that's a story that deserves to be heard more within libertarian circles.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad you got to hear about it.
I had no idea about it. Like, it is a good symbology of how we need to stand up for our own individual rights. If they weren't hurting anybody else, they weren't causing any commotions. This is all just policy enforcement, like a way to get over on people, whether they had a bias against them or not. They still use the law to target individuals based on who they are and their individuality. So it is a good story. I mean, honestly, I think we all need to have that kind of gumption, be able to stand up when we see things wrong, and the courage to stand next to somebody who's standing up. So they don't, I think too many people are sitting on the sidelines, not wanting to put themselves out there and risk it.
Yeah, I find a lot of isn't it true? Jason Black says, "Is it true John Hosper's our first post candidate was gay?" I looked up, I've seen some disputes. The story you shared is solid, by the way. Thank you for that, John Hospers. I'm not gonna tell tales out of school. He was back in the day we would call a confirmed bachelor. Read into that what you will. His family, his estate, there's differing things. I like to consider him, part of the community, but that's how that goes, especially back then. But with regards to standing up for people who are just trying to live their lives and exercise their beliefs and live their lives, I think we can find some same connective tissue to certainly what we saw in response in 2020 to the lockdowns, to people wanting to gather, whether it's just gather for a get together or at their church or their synagogue or their temple, or their mosque. Like, I think that there's a same kind of story for the fact that government was just trying to intervene in these people's lives, and stop them from exercising who they were and living their lives. And so for me as a libertarian, I try to take the energy that I hear from our forefathers at Stonewall and bring it forward. And as we're, nearing the end of Pride Month, we're entering into Stonewall weekend. The other community that I like to talk about is, and it ties right back into COVID, is the LGBTQ community's fight back against government regulation of medication and who could take what kind of medication during the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s. Let me just tell you right now, before he was messing with things with COVID, Anthony Fauci was a real problem for the LGBTQ community back then. And if you've ever seen the movie Dallas Buyers Club, it is a movie about people who are suffering from AIDS being able to try different medications that the government was trying to prevent them from doing. They were literally having to smuggle these therapies in. And it's a great story about medical freedom. And so I think as we enter into Stonewall Weekend, I just wanted to spend a few minutes to talk with you folks out there who might be watching this, who are maybe libertarians, who have not heard these stories or understood and connected these stories to the greater liberty message, who maybe feel like this is just identity politics, but really what we can learn from different communities is their own struggles for liberty, whether it's the gay community, the Christian community, the Black community, women, immigrants, whoever's being abused by government in whatever unique way. We can learn from those stories, tie them together to the greater struggle for liberty, so that we're not just one strand out there, but there were multiple strands of rope binding together to fight for our freedom. And so that's the message that I'm hoping we can push as we enter into this weekend. As we just had Juneteenth last week, we're about to have Stonewall Weekend, and we're coming up on the 4th of July, a true celebration of independence. And those are the ideals that I think make our country actually great, Eric. Not perfect. You said earlier, hey, you're not a perfect person. Well, hey, we're not a perfect country. But I think we can fight for those ideals and get better and be better. And I just want to thank you again for being a candidate and for maybe doing that pull and being that strand of rope out there in the Nebraska 2nd Congressional.
I'm trying to pull people with me, man. I'm trying to bring everybody up. Let us all take back control. I really appreciate you giving me the chance to be on here and listen to this, like, stories. I'm not sure how we can. I wanted to talk to you about this because the trans community, it seems to be wanting to push things in the face of the people who don't want it, and I think that's bringing a lot of negativity to when we talk about the LGBT community. We look at those bad things about it, but we don't hear those stories about they're just trying to be themselves. And
I think that is ultimately where most trans people even are at. Now, there's always going to be the folks out there who want to rage bait or who want to try to the Lily Tinos out there. I don't know if you know who that. You probably don't know who that is, but
I've never
folks out there who are trying to be very informative. But I think by and large, most trans people just want a chance to be themselves and to feel safe and comfortable. And I think the ultimate answer to the question there is liberty. I don't think we need to be having government be the bathroom police. I think property owners can be the bathroom police.
I agree.
And same with locker rooms, intramural sport, like all this stuff, I think ultimately can be solved more at a local level and not have to have a giant federal response to it. And I think what creates the reactionary politics that you might see, people being more steadfast and really being wanting to fight, is because they see themselves being fought against by our own government. And if you feel threatened, you're going to fight back. And sometimes that's in a way that can make people feel very uncomfortable. And part of that is people, if you're going through and you're not seeing it and not understanding their struggle, what they might be going through, it's very easy for them to feel ignored and they have to be louder in the room. And I think what would ultimately calm everything down is if our government got out of the business of trying to legislate people's private lives. And this is regards to everything. I have always said that the best people out there are individuals exercising their own self-governance, their own self-expression, their own free speech, their own property rights. And then as a parents being the best guardians for their kids and not bureaucrats in the government. I trust a parent who has unconditional love to navigate maybe weird or unfamiliar territory because they have unconditional love, right? And as long as you're coming from that place of love, nothing can go wrong. But I do think that, sometimes there are folks who want to get it twisted on both sides of the of the culture war. And that's why I'm a culture ceasefire guy. And, but I'll say the thing that I think more people need to do is get out and meet people who are different than themselves. I
Absolutely.
encourage people who might be critics of the trans community or trans politics to go meet trans people.
Yeah,
Same way
I
I
think
encourage
the way
people
you
who might.
discerned it, the way you said trans people and the trans politics, I think that's where we're getting the disconnect. We're getting too much hype and sensationalism on one side of it, and we're not getting to know the people themselves. And we're just getting a generalized either rage bait on this or full support on this without real context. But like you said, just meet the people, know their stories, actually
Yeah,
know what they're going
there
through.
are good and bad people of every persuasion and every
Everyone.
gender and every background and everything. And so that's the other thing that I remind people of is when we look at um, the most extreme folks out there on any side of a boundary, that's who we seek to use to demonize other people. And I think ultimately when we do that, we lose our common humanity and individuality. And that's the thing, that collectivism is ultimately poisonous, which is, and that's why, like Ron Paul said, racism is an ugly form of collectivism. It's the same with any kind of ism, you know, and that is, for me, why I'm somebody who is very live and let live. And I think that that will serve us well. So that's
Thank
kind
you.
of how I feel on that. And again, I appreciate you coming on out today, Eric, and having a conversation with me again. I'm going to shout it one more time since you hung out through the last bit here.
Keep plugging me, man. I can always use it. Thank you.
Yeah, go to ForemanTakeBackOurHouse.com. ForemanTakeBackOurHouse.com. His name is Eric Foreman. It's spelled differently than the guy from That 70s Show.
But it's exactly the same as the Dr. Eric Foreman on
From House. I was just about to say. So
Oh,
there's a
me too.
lot
The
of.
one thing I didn't know.
Yeah, he's not a doctor from House. He is not Red's child from That 70s Show. He is Eric Michael Foreman, and he is running for the Nebraska 2nd Congressional District. Thank you very much for having me on. I'll let you go tonight, but you have a great evening, sir.
Thank you, Chase.
Awesome.
Have a great night.
Oh, yeah. And I want all of you to have a great night. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, you guys. We will start doing, again, more regular live streams. I'm going to have more candidates on as we get through this summer election season. I want to thank Eric. John Hospers, any earnest, my answer is Dirty Harry. If they could shoot one, they don't care. They're all gay. There you go. There we go. Sorry, just had to throw those out there, but because my ADHD would not allow me to not throw those up there. But I just want to say thank you very much for coming on, you guys. We'll have, or for joining me tonight. We will have more of these live streams. We'll have more candidates on. We'll be discussing more libertarian stories, more news and views from the libertarian lens. And I'll have some announcements about traveling pretty soon. So keep in mind for that. I'll tell you where I'm going to be pretty soon. God bless, peace, love, and liberty, and have a good night.